Tonight, we are thrilled to be hosting Salman Khan, entrepreneur and founder of the online education website Khan Academy. Originally working in the financial industry, Mr. Khan left to start Khan Academy, which has grown to be one of the largest and most well-known providers of online education worldwide. As leader of Khan Academy, Mr. Khan has worked to expand course offerings and create interactive learning tools, all with the mission of bringing free education to those who may not otherwise have access. Following Mr. Khan's talk tonight will be a student-moderated interview, as well as an audience Q&A session. The audience members who have been selected to ask questions will be asked to line up along the side of the auditorium, on this side. There will be space, hopefully, following the address and during the interview portion. Finally, please make sure to submit any additional questions you have through Twitter using the hashtag #KhanAtCal during the event. And on that note, I'd like to welcome to the stage Salman Khan. Please join me in giving him a warm round of applause.
I'd like to start just kind of getting a sense of the room. How many of y'all have used Khan Academy? How many of you have not used Khan Academy? All right. Don't be shy. Okay. So y'all are pretty familiar. This is maybe the most familiar or audience that I've ever talked to. So congratulations. Actually, I'm curious. I mean, just yell it out. What did you find Khan Academy most useful for? Just yell it out. Some statistics, some algebra. Anyone who, what else? Biology, physics. Okay. Good. All right. This is good. We're getting a little market research out of you. Elizabeth runs our content, so we're always trying to figure out what people are finding valuable. So it sounds like y'all are pretty familiar with it, but what I always do, and hopefully a lot of y'all appreciate that Khan Academy is much more than just videos now. We have exercises, we have tools for teachers, we have diagnostics, a whole bunch of stuff. But just to get everyone on the same page, although it sounds like it's maybe not necessary for you guys, I will start with a little bit of a montage.
Of these interactions are just through the gravity.
This is an age right after Isaac Newton.
I'm told that humidity makes it feel hotter. Why is this?
Excellent question.
And you can just see the pleasure he had.
Can you determine which light bulb is being switched?
Things actually can interbreed, although for these two in particular, it seems like the mechanics would get kind of...
Keep playing around with these numbers and see what kind of colors I can come up with.
If this does not blow your mind, you have no worship.
I thought Euler's identity would be popular with you guys. But as mentioned, it's not just videos. This right over here. I don't know if this is clear. This is some screen grabs of our computer science platform, where it's a kind of a very active environment. You can go, you can write your code in real time. It changes here even as you change the value of variables. You can save portfolios. You can get feedback from the community, and really showing the creative side of programming. And it's been used in elementary schools by literally early 7 and 8 year olds, and we have graduate students using this for their PhD thesis. So it's a pretty fun thing for us. This is our math missions, and to a large degree, this is where a lot of our investment has been over the last, really since we kind of got funding. Students can work at their own pace. There's 150,000 exercises aligned to standards. It guides them, kind of keeps them up their learning edge. It has game mechanics. It tries to keep them engaged. Very recently, we just launched an iPad app. Some of y'all might have kind of actually, we only have the new one, but the old iPad app is just kind of a rich video viewing experience. But about 3 months ago, we launched an interactive app where it's our missions, but not only does it have our missions, but it has handwriting recognition. So if the answer to a question is the square root of cosine of x squared, you can literally just write that with your finger, and it recognizes that. So I'll show a little, if this is the same, I'll show a little video of that. snapshot of where we're at. Actually, this is a little slightly dated snapshot. Someone in almost every country on the planet is using Khan Academy in some way, shape, or form. We have actually over 1 million registered educators using Khan Academy in different ways. We've 15 million users use our site every month with 25 million registered users. We estimate that last year, roughly 20 to 30% of school-age students used Khan Academy in the US at least once, and obviously there's a lot of international uses as well. But before we kind of go into where we are and the future of it, I'll give a little bit of background on how all of this started. And I suspect that a lot of y'all know this. Actually, since you guys have used the site so much, I'm curious, how many have used it as early as, let me start, as early as 2008? Oh, wow. Actually, I'm at 2007. Anyone? Okay, 2007, well, that would be, I'm going to call your bluff at some point. 2009, as early as 2009. And the 2008 people can raise their hand too. 2010. Okay, 2011. 12, 13. Okay, that gives us, so that's, I mean, there's several people in the room who've, I guess, been using it, I'm guessing roughly since early high school or even possibly middle school, so that's exciting. So you've kind of been on a little bit of this adventure with me. So if we fast forward back, it's almost 11 years now. This is a fall of 2004. I was a freshly minted MBA. I was a year out of business school. My original background was in computer science and in math. But I was working as an analyst at an investment firm, as was introduced, and one of my cousins, Nadia, they were visiting me from New Orleans, which is where I was born and raised as well, and it just came out of conversation that Nadia, who was 12, was having trouble with math. And when I talked to her more about it turned out she took a placement exam at the end of 6th grade, there was unit conversion on it, and because of that, she thought that she just couldn't understand unit conversion, she didn't do well, and then they were placing her into a slower math class. And I don't think she fully appreciated the implications of that. I don't think her mom fully appreciated that. But I said, look, Nadia, when you go back to New Orleans, if you're up for it, I'm up for getting on the phone with you. We can figure out some way to maybe see each other's writing or message each other. And I want to work with you because I'm 100% sure that you can understand unit conversion. And so she agreed. So this is August of 2004. Every day after school for her, after work for me, we're on the phone. And long story short, after a couple of weeks, she gets unit conversion. Then we keep working. She gets caught up with her class. We start covering a little bit of algebraic concepts. She gets a little bit ahead of her class. And at that point, I became what I call a tiger cousin. I called up her school, and I said, I really think Nadia Rahman should retake that placement exam from last year. They said, who are you? I'm her cousin. So, somewhat surprisingly, they let her retake the test, and she went from being in the slow math class to not even the average one, but going into the advanced math class. And so that was pretty exciting. It was this kind of very small intervention that I did with someone whom I cared about. And so I started working with her two younger brothers, who were 9 and 7 at the time. Same thing on the phone. And then a bunch of things happened over the next 2 years. First of all, I was in Boston at the time. I was working for a very small firm. It was literally myself, my boss, who was our portfolio manager, Dan Wool. It was called Wool Capital, and his dog. And his wife, my boss's wife, became a professor at Stanford Law School. So we moved the entire firm out to the Bay Area, and so we relocated out here. The other thing that happened is word got around the family that free tutoring was going on. And so I found myself every day after work on conference calls with 10, 15 cousins, family, friends, all over the country. And to help myself scale up, I saw this kind of common theme that they were, even the ones that were quite good students, they might be in algebra, but they were a little bit foggy on their negative numbers, or they're a little bit foggy on dividing decimals, or whatever it might be. So I started writing this kind of exercise generator so that they could get as much practice as possible. And so I, as their tutor, could keep track of what they were doing. And that was the first Khan Academy. That's when I got the domain name, and it was almost like a little bit of a joke. It's like, yeah, the domain name's available. My name's Khan, and I guess somewhat inspired by Dan Wool and Wool Capital. So I set that up, and it had nothing to do with videos at the time. And then you fast forward to November of 2006. I was at a dinner party, and all of my friends knew that I had this crazy project with my cousins. And not only was I spending, sometimes several hours every afternoon working with them, but also I was writing all the software, and I was actually showing this off to a bunch of friends. And one of them is actually the host of the party, and give him full credit, his name's Zuli Ramzan. He says, well, Sal, you know, this is all cool and everything, but how are you actually scaling up your lessons? And I told him, it's actually hard. You know, sometimes I covered one thing with Nadia, and then Sasha the next week I need to cover it again. So, and so he said, well, it's just an idea. Why don't you record some of them as videos and upload them onto YouTube? And I immediately say, no, that's a horrible idea. YouTube is for cats playing piano, not for serious math. But I went home that weekend, got over the idea that it was not my idea, and I decided to give it a shot. And those first few videos, you know, I was just doing stuff, and I saw that, you know, a lot of my cousins were asking me about logarithms, exponents, negative numbers, whatever it might be. So I started making videos on that, and I started telling my cousins, look, you know, these are for you. Tell me if you want more topics. These can expose you to things, answer your questions, and then when we get on the phone, we can have a deeper conversation, or I can learn more about what I should do videos on. And after a couple of weeks of that, I asked them for feedback, and they somewhat famously and backhandedly told me that they like me better on YouTube than in person. and you know, it's worth thinking about what they were saying and what they weren't saying. They weren't saying that they didn't appreciate me taking interest in what they were doing, taking out time for them, motivating them. But what they were saying, and it's kind of obvious in hindsight, is when you're learning something, it's hard to kind of have someone, no matter how however non-judgmental they're trying to be, waiting for you to understand it. We've all had it where, you know, you ask a friend or a parent, hey, you know, how does this work? It's like, oh, it's really easy. You just do this. It's easy, right? They're like, oh, yeah, it sounds easy. And, you know, you try to just kind of get out of that engagement as quickly as possible. And so now they can get it at their own time, their own pace. If you're in a calculus class and you're a little rusty on some of your algebra, you didn't have to, you know, expose yourself to judgment. You didn't have to be ashamed. There's no judgment. And, you know, at midnight watching a video about some basic algebra, your algebra class, you can watch some of your basic arithmetic. So I kept going. And, you know, I was uploading these videos on YouTube, and they were by default public. And it soon became clear that people who were not my cousins were watching. And it sounds like actually some of you guys. And you know, initially I just saw the view count go up a little bit, and then the comments started to come in, and you know, those early comments, a lot of them were just simple thank yous, and even that was a pretty big deal. I don't know how much time y'all spend on YouTube. Most of the comments are not thank yous. But then the comments got more intense. The comments, you know, this is the reason why I was able to pass algebra class. This is, you know, I thought that I was bad at math, but now I want to be a physicist. This is the reason why after leaving the military, I haven't seen math in 15 years. I'm ready to now go back and you know, for the math classes in college. I remember, I think this was late 2007, there was a letter came in, and I brought my wife. I was like, this is incredible. There was a woman, and she literally said, my two sons have a learning disability. These videos are the only way that they're able to keep up with their class. Myself and our family, our entire family, we pray for your entire family every night. And so you can imagine how I felt. My day job, I worked as an analyst at a hedge fund. I wasn't used to people praying for me. At least in that way. So I kept going, and you know, you fast forward to 2009. This is about 3 years after making the first video. And I was still working on the software as well. There were several 100,000 people using the site every month. I set it up as a not-for-profit. I started talking to a couple of foundations. It seemed like there would be some interest in supporting this. You know, my wife and I sat down. We had some savings, essentially for a down payment on a house. We were renting then. And but you know, my wife, hey, it looks like there's something real here. Let's try to, you know. She told me, Sal, you should try to do this for a year. It seems like there's something. You know, I had a stack of people all over the planet who were sending these incredible letters. So I took the plunge. And I think anytime you do anything entrepreneurial, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, you almost have to start with a somewhat almost delusional optimism. You kind of assume, oh, well, surely, you know, for me, it was the social return on investment is so high, you know, this could scale one day to millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people. surely one of these foundations would want to fund this, and the funding was so small at that point. But like a lot of stories, you kind of take the plunge and you come to terms with the reality that a lot of those initial conversations after, meeting 5 turn into, well, this isn't exactly what we fund, thanks but no thanks, or I'm sure someone else will fund you, it's not what we do. And, you fast forward about 7 or 8 months, it became pretty stressful. It was, our first child had just been born, we had to kind of rent a larger place, we were digging into our savings, about $5,000 a month. We had I was getting kind of $5, $10 donations off of PayPal. It was amounting to several $100s a month. If there's any of you, thank you. But it was, frankly, it was one of the, if not the most stressful time of my life. And, right when I was kind of going through all of that, I even thought about updating my resume and trying to maybe go back to my old career. All of a sudden, a $10,000 donation came in. And so I see who it is. Her name is Ann Doerr. She's based in Palo Alto. We were in Mountain View. So I immediately email her and I said, thank you so much for this incredibly generous donation. This is the largest donation that Khan Academy has ever received. If we were a physical school, we would now have a building named after you. and Ann immediately replied back. And she's like, oh, well, I use the site with my daughters. I use it myself. You have all the stuff about banking and economics. I find it really valuable. I'd love to meet and find out more about what you're doing. And so it was literally 3 days later, we were at an Indian buffet restaurant in downtown Palo Alto. And Ann asks me, she says, well, what's your goal here? And I told her, when you fill out the paperwork to become a 501c3, to become a not-for-profit, there's a form that the IRS gives you where it says mission, and they give you about a line and a half. And I filled out a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And Ann said, that's ambitious. How do you see yourself doing that? And I told her, it's a mission. I don't think I'm just going to be able to check it off this weekend and then move on to healthcare or something. But I showed her she had obviously seen the videos, but I showed her kind of the testimonials. I used to literally walk around with a notebook of letters that I'd received from people all over the planet. I showed her screenshots of the software, the data, the analytics, the growth and the number of users. I explained to her that it's not just about videos, it's about exercise, it's about interactions, it's about building a community online so people can learn from each other. It's not about replacing physical experiences, it's about empowering them. It's about creating tools for teachers so that a classroom could be much more interactive. And Ann said, well, you've made a surprising amount of progress. I only have one question. How are you supporting yourself? And in as proud of a way as possible, I said, I'm not. And she kind of processed that, and we part ways. And literally 10 minutes later, I'm driving into my driveway in Mountain View, and I get a text message from Ann. And it says, you really need to be supporting yourself. I just wired you $100,000. So that was a good day. and frankly, the start of kind of a cascade of crazier and crazier events. A month later, I was running a summer camp, a physical summer camp with a friend, and the whole reason why I was doing this is I was kind of like this virtual tutor guy, but once again, I never thought this was going to replace a physical environment. I always said this could liberate a physical environment from having to be about lecture, instead it could be about simulations and dialogue and games. And so I was in the middle of a simulation where I had six 7th graders playing a game of Risk, while the other 20 7th graders traded securities based on the outcome of the game of Risk. Good game. There was one 7th grader who invented shorting all on his own. Introduced him to some people. And while that was happening, I started getting some text messages from Ann, which you can imagine I now take very seriously. And there were actually like 5 or 6, and it was hard to make out what order they were coming in. It was kind of cryptic, but they read along the lines of, I'm in Aspen, Colorado at the Aspen Ideas Festival. I'm in the main pavilion, Bill Gates on stage, last 5 minutes talking about Khan Academy. So I didn't know what to make of this, so I immediately boot the nearest 7th grader off of a computer, and I start looking for some evidence of this thing that Ann is talking about. And after about 10 minutes, I actually found the footage. It was Walter Isaacson, head of the Aspen Institute, on stage interviewing Bill Gates, and I asked him, what are you excited about in education? And Bill, I call him Bill now, he he immediately goes off into this. There's this site I use called Khan Academy. I use it with my kids. I use it myself. And so you can imagine, and he literally went on for about 5 minutes. And at first I was like, is this real? Is this really happening? Is this a dream? It was exciting. But my next reaction, it was a very kind of visceral thing. I actually became nervous. Those videos were for Nadia, not Bill Gates. And I went home that night, and some of my friends, they started emailing me, and I told my wife about it. But then, Frank, I said, well, what do I do now? What's the protocol here? Do I call him? Guess he's not listening. And they left me in that limbo state for about 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, I'm in my walk-in closet about to record a video, and I get a call on my cell phone. It's a Seattle number. I answer it. Hello. Hi, this is Larry Cohen. I'm Bill Gates' chief of staff. You might have heard that Bill's a fan. Yeah, I heard that. And if you're free in the next few weeks, we'd love to fly you up to Seattle and learn more about what you're doing and ways that we can work together. And I was looking at my calendar for the month, completely blank. I said, yeah, maybe I gotta cut my nails next Wednesday. So I flew up to Seattle. We had a meeting. It was eerily similar to the meeting with Ann. And right around the same time, some folks from Google, and I kind of looked into it. These are all independent events. They just happened to hit right around the same time. Some folks from Google reached out. They brought me in and said, what would you do if you had more resources? I made the same pitch that I made to the Gates Foundation, to Bill Gates, to Ann, around, hey, we'd build this exercise platform, tools for educators, for tutors, for parents. We'd cover more content. We would internationalize it to really reach everyone on the planet. And then all of a sudden, fall of 2010, so this is almost exactly a year after I quit my job, it all came together, and we had our first real funding from the Gates Foundation and Google to become a real organization. So we were able to hire up a team, get office space, et cetera, et cetera. And what we immediately started investing in or working on was that exercise platform. We already had a lot of videos, but it was this, we wanted people to really do active problem solving. And what you have over here, this is our knowledge map. It's no longer a primary navigational interface for Khan Academy. I'm actually curious, how many of y'all remember the knowledge map? How many? Okay, there's a handful of folks here. It's still going on behind the scenes, and I show it in the presentation because it tells, it in some ways communicates how we think about learning at least math. Each of those circles there is a concept in mathematics. At the very top is stuff that you would learn in kindergarten, counting or basic arithmetic. And as you master concepts, you go further and further down the knowledge map. And today the knowledge map goes down as low as or as far as college level calculus, college level statistics. You all saw the videos go much beyond that. They go into differential equations and linear algebra and other things. But that's where the interactive part goes. And on some level, this is common sense. This is the way that you would play a video game. You work, you keep trying level 1 until you beat the boss or solve the puzzle, and then you move on to level 2. It's the way that you would learn a martial art. You keep practicing your white belt skills until you've mastered it, and then you become a yellow belt. But what we point out is that this is not the way that a traditional academic model is architected. In a traditional academic model, we group students together, usually by age, and then later maybe perceived ability. We move them together at a set pace, and then what typically happens is you go to the classroom, you get a lecture, let's say that it's on exponents, you go home, do some homework, next day you review homework, get another lecture, do homework, lecture, homework. You do that for about 2 weeks, and then you get a test. And on that test, maybe I get a 60%, maybe you get an 80%, maybe you get a 95%. And even though that test has identified gaps, I didn't know 60%, I didn't know 40% of the material that just happened to be on that test. Even the A student, maybe it was a careless mistake, but maybe they didn't know what, something with a 0th power is. Even though it identified that gap, the whole class then moves on to the next concept, usually a more advanced concept that's going to build on that. It might be logarithms or negative exponents. And to understand the absurdity of that on some level, imagine if we did other things in our life that way. Say home building. So you bring the contractor in, and you say, look, I'm told we have 3 weeks to build the foundation, do what you can. And so, maybe it rains, maybe, some of the supplies don't show up. 3 weeks later, the inspector comes, and says, look, the concrete's still wet over there, that part's not quite up to code, I'd give it an 80%. Say, oh great, that's a C minus. Let's build the first floor. Same thing, we have 2 weeks, do what you can, inspector shows up, oh, I'd give it an 85%. You say, oh great, that's a B minus. Second floor, third floor, fourth floor, and then while you're building that fourth floor, the whole thing collapses. And if your reaction to that is the reaction that's typically that we have in education, it's like, oh, we had a bad contractor, or we needed more or better inspection, and who knows, maybe that was part of it. But the real absurd thing was the process. We were artificially constraining when and how long we had to build a foundation to do something, pretty much ensuring a variable outcome. We took the trouble of identifying the gaps, but then we just ignored it. So instead of doing it that way, we said do it the other way around. Instead of holding fixed when and how long you do something with a variable outcome, A, B, C, D, F, do it the other way around. What's fixed is that every student should actually master exponents, and what's variable is when and how long they actually have to learn something. Now, this is, it's being used by schools and outside of schools all over the planet, really. It's kind of still surreal for a lot of us at the team now. But what's exciting for us is when we get letters from folks or videos from folks kind of speaking to their personal. It's one thing to say, oh, 15 million people this month, but to hear their personal stories. And so, this one that I'm about to show you is probably one of the coolest ones that we've gotten in the last year or so.
So I actually dropped out of high school twice, both during my freshman year. And when I eventually came back, I was put in sort of lower level math and science classes because I was so behind. Then I discovered Khan Academy, and I was able to skip 2 years worth of math just through using the site. And I came into school, I took the exam with students who had been enrolled in the class all year, and I was actually able to get the highest or the second highest scores in the class. So for me, Khan Academy really changed the trajectory of my entire life. Because without it, I don't think I ever really would have been inspired to learn and to love math and to love science. I ended up graduating as a valedictorian and going on to Princeton, where I'm now a computer science major, and I'm absolutely passionate about learning about computers, about math, about science. And without Khan Academy, I don't think that these things would really matter to me the way that they do today. So I'd just like to say a massive thank you to everyone at Khan Academy, Saul and the team. Please keep doing the good work that you're doing because you're really changing lives.
So a neat kind of epilogue to that. So when we found out he's a computer science major, we said, we have internships. And he applied, and he did very well in the interview process. And actually, some of the people interviewing who didn't know his story kind of came up to us like, who is this guy? He's just rocking every interview. And we're like, well, why are you surprised? We helped educate him. Yeah. But he was actually he actually played a very big role in the iPad app that we showed a couple of slides ago. And we then gave him a full-time offer, and just a few weeks ago, he accepted. So in a very fun way, we are solving our own labor problem. Very exciting. Now, as much as we would love to take credit for what you just heard, I think anyone watching that would say, okay, sure, at some point in his life, he was disengaged, he dropped out of high school, etc. But there was something pretty special about Charlie. He had a mindset where he didn't give up. He believed that he was capable of learning on his own. He pushed himself out of his comfort zone to do everything that he did. And to a large degree, it was that mindset that was 95% of the battle, and it was just Khan Academy was a tool that allowed him to apply that mindset. And a big question, it's an interesting field of study now, there's a whole body of work around growth mindset, this research that, people either have, broadly speaking, fixed or growth mindset. So fixed mindset says I'm either good at math or I'm bad at math. I'm either good at writing or I'm bad at writing. It's in my DNA somehow. While people with a growth mindset say, well, I don't really know what my potential is until I apply myself, push myself out of my comfort zone. Failure shouldn't be stigmatized. I should embrace it. I should learn from it. And disproportionately, people with growth mindsets are very successful, as you can imagine a Charlie is and probably will be. And that by itself would only be vaguely interesting, except for the fact that there's actually a fairly powerful set of research that shows that you can intervene and take someone from having a fixed mindset to having a growth mindset. And people really appreciate that failure is when your neurons in your brain actually get stronger, that your brain really can grow through deliberate practice and stepping out of your comfort zone. And so we were given some PSA space, public service announcement space, by Comcast last year. And at first we're like, oh, we could use it just to tell people there's a site called Khan Academy and get more people using it. We said, well, wouldn't it be neat if we could leverage some of this growth mindset research to actually do kind of a mass growth mindset intervention? And this next video is what we did. This was actually on, especially a lot of the Comcast NBC channels last fall. And actually it's going to be on this fall again.
Nobody's born smart. We all start at zero. Can't talk, can't walk, certainly can't do algebra. Adding, reading, riding a bike. Nobody's good at anything at first. There was a time when Einstein couldn't count to 10. And Shakespeare had to learn his ABCs just like the rest of us. Thankfully, we're born to learn. Slowly, surely, you stumble, slip, crawl, fall, and fail, and fall. Frustrating, confusing, trying, struggling, until one day, you walk. One foot in front of the other, one idea on top of the next, each wrong answer making your brain a little bit stronger. Failing is just another word for growing, and you keep going. This is learning. Knowing that you'll get it, even if you haven't gotten it yet. Because the most beautiful, complex concepts in the whole universe are built on basic ideas that anyone, anywhere, can understand. Whoever you are, wherever you are, you only have to know one thing. You can learn anything.
So I'm sure many of y'all are very familiar with the College Board and too recent of a memory. Given that you're here, I'm guessing that you actually probably have favorable memories of the College Board. But as you may or may not know, I mean, they're the makers of the SAT, the AP exams, et cetera, et cetera. And they have a new president. Actually, he's a really interesting guy. And they are launching a new SAT for 2016 that is more aligned with what students actually learn in school. And the powerful part about it is they've kind of finally publicly recognized that, look, there is a whole industry, it's literally $1 billion industry that has grown around unleveling the playing field for what should be kind of a meritocratic thing. And so they reached out to us and said, as we launch this, we actually want to create the best test prep that happens to be free. So we're working with the College Board now, and we're actually going to launch the first version of it in about 6 weeks for the 2016 SAT. It should only get better from then, but it's literally going to be, it's not just going to be practice problems or practice tests, it's going to be diagnostics, it's going to be software, where it's going to kind of look at what your gaps are, and get as much practice as you need so that you can really move ahead. And once again, not just in math, but in reading comprehension and writing and everything. So we're very excited about this. So everything we talked about so far has been the world that most of us grew up in, the developed world, the English-speaking world. But a lot of y'all are probably wondering, what about the rest of the planet? And all of these are pictures of Khan Academy being used in random parts of the planet. It's, for the most part, other volunteers, NGOs, taking our stuff, online or offline, and taking it to these remote places. And all of these are exciting. We get literally pictures like this almost every day. They're all exciting, but probably the neatest one is the one on the top right. I used to give talks like this a couple of years ago and I said, who knows? Maybe one day we'll be used in Mongolia, just imagining the furthest place on the planet. And then a few months later, I got an email from Mongolia. And it was from the young woman at the top right there, her name's Zaya. And there's a pretty extensive text to her email, but then there was a link to a YouTube video. I watched the YouTube video first. And it was actually very similar to Charlie's videos. She said, I like Khan Academy, that really helped with math, I enjoyed it, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, that's cool, but I immediately assumed that she must be middle class or upper middle class. She spoke English quite well, she had access to the internet. Then I read the text of the email, and it turned out that there was a group of volunteers, actually engineers at Cisco Systems at the time, who are using their vacation time to go to Mongolia and set up computer labs with broadband in orphanages. And what you see in the top right there, those are the orphan girls using Khan Academy, and Zaya was one of the orphans. And that by itself was something that you kind of expect to read out of a science fiction book, but also similar to kind of Charlie's story, Zaya then went on to become one of our top contributors in the Mongolian language of videos. So again, one of these kind of coming for full circle type of things. Oh yeah, chop up bigger. So, as you can imagine, our mission is a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere, not just in English, and we want to get as far as what we can. So these are kind of the splash screens for some of our first languages that we've completely localized to. Once again, not just the videos, the exercises, the teacher dashboards, everything. This Brazilian Portuguese, Spanish, French. We're very relevant in huge parts of Africa. Turkish, Hindi, Korean. These are what's coming with full localization soon. The videos themselves have started to be dubbed and translated into, I think, over 30 languages. And just to get a flavor of what that looks and sounds like, I'll show you this next montage.
Me comí 2 cuartos de pizza.
Hypoténuse commune, ok.
7, 13, 15.
और मैं इस हाथ से ब्लॉक को धकेलने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ इस डायरेक्शन में.
توجد قطعتين من معدن النحاس والزنك.
P R به توان 2 ضرب داره.
Chi ha ricordato la sciocca simcia, la piccola fetta che magari è fida.
Ele muove quelle oana coisa.
16 bölü 16 1'e eşittir.
E muitas outras coisas importantes.
I'm Zaya from Mongolia. Your videos are so interesting and funny. Make more lessons.
Watch that when I get lazy. So these are just more pictures of Khan Academy being used all over the planet. And what I tell everyone, and I be very clear, Khan Academy is much more than me at this point. We have over 80 full-time folks down in Mountain View, and actually a couple of people remote. We have over 100 contractors who are helping us develop and vet content, and these are grad students or people who are just working from home, or professors, or people working in industry who are helping us out. We've had over 14,000 people help us translate and subtitle videos. We've obviously had a lot of supporters, both big and small, who are helping us to just make sure that we can keep doing this mission. And what I tell all of them is it feels like we're genuinely at a special place in history. The thought experiment I always give to them is, rewind 400 years, and if you go to Western Europe, and even 400 years ago, Western Europe was one of the more educated parts of the planet. But 400 years ago, about 20% of men and about 10% of women were literate. And I suspect that if you were to ask someone who was literate, say a member of the clergy, what percentage of the population do you think is even capable of reading? Even if you had a great education system, they might have said, oh, well, maybe 40 or 50% is even capable of reading. Well, you fast forward 400 years, we now know today that it's actually pretty close to 100% of the population is capable of reading. And with that lens, I like to think, well, in today's time, well, what similar blinders do we have on? If I were to survey y'all or go outside and say, well, what percent of the population do you think is capable of understanding quantum physics, or understanding genetics, or programming a computer, or writing a great poem, or composing a song? A lot of y'all might say, oh, well, maybe today it's maybe 5%, but if you had a great education system, maybe it's 20%. But what if the answer is actually 80%, or 90%, or even 100%? What would that mean for society? What would that mean for civilization? And I think at any other time in history, really, that would have just been kind of fodder for a good science fiction book. But I think where we are right now, given what's happening, I think we're at the very early stages of this inflection point that actually is likely to be, for sure, as big as the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment, the Renaissance. It might even rival agriculture. It might rival writing. I think we have a shot of taking this thing called education, this thing that has always been scarce, it's always been expensive, it's always been the key determiner between the haves and the have-nots, but make it like clean drinking water or just basic shelter and just a fundamental human right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khan, for your address. We're grateful to have the opportunity to hear our ideas presented on our stage, and we're thrilled to engage with you further during the moderated portion of our event. The remainder of the event will run in 2 parts. First, an interview with our student moderator, including questions submitted via email and Twitter. And second, an audience Q&A with the individuals who have been selected and notified. If you are one of these individuals, please line up along the side of the auditorium, and a Berkeley Forum member will bring a microphone over following the interview. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our student moderator for tonight, Carter Keeling.
Mr. Khan, I want to start by thanking you for coming out today and for giving your address, and I want to thank everyone here for coming out. I want to start with a question kind of about your critics' points of view. And you addressed it in your address, but a lot of times your critics say that it's dangerous for too much of a student's education to occur behind a computer screen. And you respond to this by saying that Khan Academy isn't meant to totally replace the classroom. It's meant to sort of liberate the classroom and open up educational resources to students. But with that in mind, do you think that there is the possibility that technology will someday totally replace the need for the traditional classroom setting?
I don't think any time in kind of the near future. I mean, the way we think about it is, there's, if you have nothing, if you're literally, you live in a slum in Calcutta, we do hope that, there's a world in the not too distant future, in 5 or 10 years, where you will get access to a low-cost tablet, and it will be localized, and it will be relevant for you, and it is. How many of y'all have read Diamond Age? Oh, you guys have to, okay. Few people. Well, it's a kind of, I wouldn't recommend reading it, it's kind of a crazy cyberpunk novel, so, but it has a neat idea. It has something called the Young Ladies Illustrated Primer, where in the book, it was made by some nobility for his granddaughter, but then it gets bootlegged and gets in the hands of 200,000 orphan girls who live on barges and they take over the planet. And that's kind of one goal of, not necessarily, well, maybe, that is there. So if you have nothing, that's there. If you have a very bad school, that's there. But the real ideal is, and this is what I would want for my children, this is what I would want for everyone here, frankly what I would want for everyone on the planet, is you have tools like Khan Academy, cover a lot of core things, and even beyond core. Education is this whole spectrum of things. Maybe at this end is you're more, what are your multiplication tables, and then, history facts, and then you get into more of the nuanced things, and at this end is the very open-ended things. It might be, writing poetry, or starting a business, or open-ended creative things. And our view is if Khan Academy can hit pieces of this, not just the stuff here, but actually even pieces here, we can gather people together, get peer feedback, et cetera, that doesn't mean that school, which is traditionally over here, goes away. It means that it can move up here. And so we even have, we literally have just started a lab school in our offices, downstairs from our offices, where we want to prove these things out, that you actually can leverage technology to make a classroom more human. And what we see at the lab school right now is ages 5 through 12, and these kids spend more time interacting with each other, they spend more time outside, they have more one-on-one time with the teacher than any traditional school that isn't doing these types of things. So that's our goal. With that said, all things have and can be misused, and we've heard stories of it. And the best we can do is just keep saying what we think is the right use.
You took a look at sort of the average classroom experience for mostly lower education students, and you described it as lecture, homework, and there's really no time for students to be able to pace themselves. And yet, I think of a lot of the classes I've taken here at Berkeley, and those classes run lecture, homework.
Are they similar?
Lecture, homework, yeah. So I guess, what do you see as the fundamental difference between, secondary education and then higher education, like college, that, college students don't necessarily need resources like Khan Academy as much as younger children?
I would go, yeah, I mean, the difference is that the classrooms get bigger when you get into the university, and there's less interaction. Especially if you think about kind of the introductory courses, the freshman courses, almost every university, it's several hundred people in a lecture hall with someone kind of performing in front, kind of giving a lecture, and then you do your problem sets, and then you kind of cram for an exam, a couple of nights before the test. And I think especially in those environments, I remember back when I was in those classes, I was in a room with 300 people. day in, day out, but I never got to know any of them. I just knew the 4 or 5 people who are my friends already that we all sat around each other. And so I think the ideal model for the university of the future is, look, if you need, and I've made personally 4,000 videos, but I'll be the first person to say, I don't think the videos or the lectures are the most important part of the learning process. I think by doing that, you kind of take them off the table. If you need them, they can be valuable. They're there for you. There's problems that you can work at your own time pace. There's even online communities that can help you progress. But then when you go to that classroom with those 300 people, leverage the humans in the classroom. Work with each other, teach each other, have Socratic dialogue, do simulations, do games, have more one-on-one time with the professor. The 60 minutes or 90 minutes of the lecture is not, I think, a good use of even the professor's time. But I think that's kind of the, if you think even more holistically outside of the classroom, I tell this to every university leader, I generally think that in not foreseeable, not too far future, the university will come to a campus that has a lot of a great environment, great people, great facilities, create things, whether it's engineering things or whether it's writing things or art, create things, and you have tools that you can pull. If you're trying to create something about, you can look up signal processing, you can use Khan Academy or other resources, or you can get a grad student or a professor to help you out with it, but it's a pull model. As you construct it, your transcripts should just be the things that you've created. But I think it's maybe even more applicable at the university level.
Now, the model that you've created, which is sort of based on interactive video modules, interactive exercises online, that works really well for STEM fields of study, but it doesn't necessarily translate so well for the humanities, which in which learning is driven more through dialogue and discussion. And you were kind of talking about Socratic discussion in the classroom. But how do you think that there's an inherent bias in online learning against the humanities in favor of STEM fields?
Well, on the second part, I think there is, as you mentioned, it is perhaps easier to directly address. If you need to learn how to factor a polynomial, see a couple of worked examples, do some practice problems, and it's even easy for a computer to even generate some practice problems. Not all of math, but some of the kind of the core foundations. And maybe there's an overlap between the folks who spend a lot of time on a computer and the types of things that they create. So I think there's a little bit of that. In terms of what can be addressed online in some way, I don't think history is going to be exactly the same way as the way you might address math. In fact, I don't think all of math is going to be the same way that you would address math in this way. And eventually, math also becomes very open-ended. You want to do proofs, you want to have dialogue, you want to debate things. And I learned this. I've done some history videos, and I remember when the CIA kind of came clean about how they had intervened in Chile. I did a series of videos. It was primary resources. This is just cool stuff. And I put those videos up, and the comments immediately started to light up. I got some American students saying, "Hey, you're not quite being fair to the CIA. This was the prime of the Cold War, and in that context, it actually made a lot of sense." And then I got Chilean students saying, "You're an imperialist pig. You have whitewashed history. My uncle died in that intervention." And I was saying, this didn't happen on the algebra videos. And what was interesting, it also did not happen in the history classes that I was in. In the history classes I was in, there was a narrative, and there was not a Chilean kid that ran through the door saying, "You're wrong, you're a liar, my uncle died in that intervention, this is what actually happened." And you actually think, well, why didn't that happen in my history class? And so I think one of the powers of the internet is because it's out there, it's open to the sunshine, it's open to the world, it's much harder to get away. Everyone's got some form of bias, but at least that perception of bias is exposed, I think, in almost a healthier way if you go online. And I think some of the scaffold stuff, we know that Columbus got on a boat on 1492, that's the scaffold. Now whether he was good or bad and whatever, that's an interesting debate. But you can get some of the scaffold stuff out of the way so that it frees up time for more a rich debate. And things like writing, I can imagine that being closer to what we actually see a strong parallel with programming, which is surprising for some folks because it's open-ended. You want to create things, and it's hard you can't just auto-grade that. You want other people to give you feedback, to critically analyze what you've done, and actually you can learn by critically analyzing other people's work. So I think there is stuff that we can do there as well. But it'll be a long way before we can tackle everything. Once again, it's the spectrum. I don't think it's going to be a long time before this whole spectrum is covered online. Maybe not, probably not ever. It's going to be more pieces of this so that physical experience can move.
Now I have one more question on behalf of the Berkeley Forum before we move on to the 3 questions we've selected from online submissions and then 5 questions we have from audience members. Now obviously you're super critical, at least relatively critical, of the way that public education works, not only within the United States but globally. And you know, the Common Core reforms that were passed a few years ago have kind of reinforced the critical side of public education that you sort of hone in on, creating a one-size-fits-all sort of curriculum for all students based on their grade level. In your mind, what is the single most urgent reform that ought to be made to America's public education system? And do you think that would have the impact of resounding across the world and reforming public education globally?
Yeah, and I mean, to be clear, the model that I did, kind of poke at during my talk, it has served the world very well. It kind of came into place in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, and it did lead to that thought experiment, having universal literacy, especially in the developed world, having a larger middle class. It has been by history standards, a wildly successful project, experiment, whatever you want to call it, kind of traditional mass public education. I think what I poke at, and I'm not the only one, is the notion of it hasn't been fundamentally rethought since then. I mean, there's been things on the margin, and there's definitely pockets of really strong innovation. But if you look at the 90% of schools or 95% of schools, it's still that. And so my view of what if I was emperor of education for the planet, or what I would, and I tell this, I meet ministers of education, sometimes some heads of state, and I tell them, if there's one thing you can do, create a mastery-based infrastructure, so that you can imagine a set of national or international exams, and they're not just Scantron exams. They could be an oral exam. They could be more rigorous than any set of exams that any of us have gotten in at university or in high school. They can be multi-day exams. But you create this set of exams, and if anyone reaches a threshold, it's as good as if you went to a great university or if you have gotten this professional skill, but you can prepare for it however you see fit. Right now, it's all jumbled together. The education, where you learn, is the people who credential are the same people who teach, and it's a weird incentive. It's kind of like the rating agencies and the banks being the same folks. And so you decouple those two things, and then it completely frees up the world to test new ideas on how do you prepare folks. And it would actually provide, I think, healthy competition for the traditional system, where the universities of the world could say, well, we charge a lot. We got to prove that we can prepare people for this benchmark. Once again, it could be a very nuanced benchmark, not a Scantron exam, better than what else is out there. And I think that would lead to a very healthy amount of innovation. It would free up a lot of people to kind of, if they weren't great students in high school and they kind of missed that window to get into a great university like Berkeley, but they kind of get their act together when they're 30 years old, it gives them a chance to prove that they're just as good as the student who might have gone to Berkeley when they were younger. So that's kind of that's a piece of it. I think you have to have universal access. I think getting and all the macro trends are working in this direction. The adoption of cheap tablets and access to information, all of that. So I think that combination, and I would re-architect what schools look like. There would be much more like design spaces. There would be kind of open, airy places where there's a lot more space for collaboration. There wouldn't be chairs all lined up. Teachers would have a lot more. Teaching right now is a very isolated profession. So you by yourself with 20, 30, 40 students. You get very little of the actual direct collaboration. But in a world where a lecture isn't the center anymore, you can do a lot more collaboration even amongst teachers.
Great. We have 3 questions that we've selected from submissions from audience members via email. We only really had time for 3, and we selected based on the pointedness and the relevance of the questions. So the first comes from Visual Goal, and his question is college becoming more and more redundant and unnecessary? Can we make an effective overhaul of our education system?
I think yes. So I mean, when I think about what are the great things about college, and actually, y'all are in the middle of it, and I envy y'all in a lot of ways. I mean, it's the community. It's being around. You're making friends that you're going to remember for the rest of your life. I met my wife in college, so I mean, look around. Seriously, I mean, it's hard afterwards. And so I mean, I still have, at night I still have, good and bad dreams of my time in college. I have dreams that I forgot to drop a class that I'm about to, like all of these dreams, they will never leave you. They will, and so college, and it's the environment, it's the campus, it's the faculty, that is incredible. You know, the opportunities for research, etc. What I think is broken or not optimal maybe is you have this great environment, but then the focal point is 300 people in a lecture hall, kind of trying to stay awake, taking notes, you know, cramming, you know, most of the learning. I think, you know, it's amazing there's research on almost everything except for this. When does the learning actually occur? I suspect that if, you know, you pick your, you know, Calculus 101, if you gave the final exam literally 3 days before when it was advertised, the class average will be like 20. But then you give it 3 days later, the class average is like an 80. And that tells you that most of the learning happened in those 3 days in all-night cram sessions. But no one has studied this. But then people would say, well, what is this ritual that we have been doing for the rest of the semester? We're putting all of our resources into this ritual where most of the learning has happened from peer learning in the library or at the coffee shop. And so I think that's what people should take a very close look at. I think, you know, even the units are literally in hours. It's literally a seat time based measure. They're not saying in terms of competency, in terms of what you achieve. I mean, literally, even the way college was architected, regardless of what you major in, whether you're a philosophy major or a classics major or a chemical engineer, it magically takes you exactly 4 years to learn what you need to know. Which tells you that someone said, we have 4 years, let's fill it up. As opposed to saying the other way around, well, for this, how do we empower this person? Maybe for some folks it could take 2 years, and maybe they could spend 2 years out in the field. Maybe for some people it's 6 years. So I think there's a lot of that. And I think they do need to revisit. I think there is a kind of a beautiful narrative of kind of the core intellectual, but I think there is a lot to be said about looking out into the world. I mean, vocational and intellectual have kind of, you know, historically have been like oil and water. But, you know, if you go, especially, I mean, in Silicon Valley, but it's not the only industry, tech isn't the only industry, where you see what's going on at Google or even at Khan Academy or other places, incredibly intellectual work that's happening that also happens to be very relevant to the world today. So I think some of that, I think, needs to be, it gets a little bit more into the curriculum. So it's not that it should be thrown out. And obviously cost is another issue. And I think that's actually going to force people to think more seriously about some of these questions.
The next question comes from Patrick Stetz. He says, much of learning focuses on problem solving. In college, we are expected to be able to derive equations and prove theorems. Does Khan Academy plan for videos that teach this sort of creativity? And if so, how?
Yeah, no, creativity, I mean, if there was an easy way to teach creativity, I mean, yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the reasons why we set up the lab school was this thesis, okay, like, look, you know, I keep referring to the spectrum, tackle some of these stuff, and then the physical environment can focus much more on, I guess, what we could call sometimes, you know, either social emotional skills or the metacognitive skills. And actually, in the school, you know, traditional school, you have a bunch of content standards, and you hope that the metacognitive and social emotional, whether it's creativity or grit or perseverance or whatever happen as a side effect, instead, let's target the social emotional metacognitive, and then hope that the content standards, which they should, happen as a side effect. And actually, I realized I didn't even address your question about the Common Core, which Common Core, I think, is orthogonal to how a class is architected. A Common Core says, what are the things that we would expect someone to know? And they're really kind of a baseline. And to a large degree, you know, how it's implemented matters. So it's a little bit of a, you know, people it's more of a political states' rights issue than a, you know, is it good math or bad math? To a large degree, it's modeled off of, you know, fairly rigorous thinking. But anyway, yes. So yeah, I forgot what I was talking about.
We'll move on to the last question. Before we go on to the audience Q&A. So this comes from Abdullah Khan. And he says,
cousin. No. Probably, actually, yeah. Strange how that works, yeah.
He says, have you considered distributing your online instructions in different ways? For example, making CDs for students without internet access?
Yeah, you know, it's fun. You know, some of those early pictures, that's what was happening in like 2007, 2008. People were just burning CDs and taking it out into the field. Since then, one of our interns from a couple of years ago has started a not-for-profit called KA Lite, and that is literally taking an offline version of Khan Academy, putting it on the Raspberry Pi device, and I think he has it on other low-cost. I mean, these are really like $30 devices, and a lot of NGOs are now using that to go out into the field. So yeah, that's you know, we don't. It's hard to track the offline usage, but we suspect that's a lot of what's happening in kind of the remote buildings right now.
Great, and I just want to give a quick shout out to Vishal, Patrick, and Abdullah for submitting their questions. And we're going to hand it off to the 5 audience members who've been selected from their question submission cards. I think that there's a microphone up at the front ready for them. We are relatively limited on time, so if you can try to keep your questions about 20 seconds as stated on the card, that'd be great.
I'm not limited by that.
Okay. Hi, thank you so much for your insightful forum tonight. My name is Seo Kim. So my question is, I understand that the Khan Academy has world-renowned philanthropists as its financial supporters. So in the process of receiving funding, what, if any, social or political commitments or promises did you have to make on behalf of the Academy?
Yes. So, I mean, this has actually been a great learning experience for me, because when I started, I mean, this was, the not-for-profit, for-profit decision. I mean, either way, you have different stakeholders. My old job was kind of in the for-profit world. I was an investor. I studied capital structure. I tried to understand what were people's incentives, and I saw how, especially public companies, had strange incentives a lot of times, very short-term incentives. And I said, well, I don't want Khan Academy to be that. I want Khan Academy to think on literally, generational scales, or even, scales of hundreds of years, and how can we really reach the planet. And the only thing I could think of is, well, the only institutions that I know that have done that have been things like great universities or museums or libraries, and they're all not-for-profit. So that's why I went down that route. And but it's, well, at the end of the day, people are going to give you money, and if they give you money, what do they expect in return? And I can say literally that I've been, there definitely have been people who've come up to us. No one with kind of a straight, a really malicious agenda, but people with they want this topic, or and those, because we have been lucky with a lot of other supporters they've treated us like, I would say, good investors, where they've said, here's money, show us impact, we're not going to micromanage you. And I was afraid, because a lot of these people are very powerful people. But I would say they are cognizant about how they can distort things, even inadvertently. And I would say that they've been very careful about, sometimes explicitly telling me and our team that, look, I don't want to distort what's going on. So for the most part, it's been pretty. We talk to other not-for-profits, and it is an unusual circumstance that we're in, where we've been able to. I think a large fraction of our funding is unrestricted, and even the stuff that's restricted is kind of restricted in things that we wanted to do. So far it's I could imagine. Well, we'll see how long that lasts, but so far so good.
Thank you so much once again. My name is Angela. My question is more related to the fact that we, existing here, we have access to the internet, we have access to world-class education, but more in terms of the restrictions that we put on ourselves as a limitation of how do we handle so much information, or what is our limitation of I'm not smart enough to do this, I'm not intelligent enough to do this, I don't have this, versus an actual access problem. What are suggestions that you have for making a good mind great?
Yeah, no, that's the question. You start off with at least making it possible. So creating the resources, localizing the content, making devices, and that's just a starting point. And if you just do that, I'm guessing that there, for every Albert Einstein that the world found, there was probably 50 that were squandered somehow. But now you might get another 4 or 5 that somehow latch onto these. But and it's not just about the Albert Einsteins; it's literally about the entire population. A couple of people might be able to latch on, but how do you get more people to participate? And this is, I talked about the opportunities of this inflection point, but this is actually a really serious issue that more people participate. It isn't just a feel-good thing. If you think about the societal structure that we are graduating from as a civilization, it was a pyramid. It was, at the base, you had a lot of labor. In the middle, you had kind of I guess you could call it a bureaucratic class, or an information processing class. And at the very top, you had kind of a mixture of kind of the owners of capital, and I guess you could say a creative class, the researchers, the artists, and whatever else. And automation, at first in the developed world, it was kind of outsourcing and all of that, offshoring. But automation is eventually globally going to collapse that bottom one. It literally will be robots. And then the middle one too and that's what computers are good at, is information processing. And so you're going to have this, the technology creates a larger pie, but who participates in that pie? What I just described wow, there's going to have just that little pyramid. Maybe it's mainly Silicon Valley, but what happens to the rest of society? You're either going to have literally a revolution, or you need to find some way to, in that reality, distribute, or you create a world where that top becomes much larger. And I describe that, very few people watch Star Trek from an economic point of view, which you should. But I call that the Star Trek reality, because in Star Trek there literally is no longer scarcity, which technology can potentially promise us, removing a lot of scarcity. But in that world, you see that Star Trek has graduated to a world where literally everyone in that civilization is an artist, a researcher, or an explorer. But in order to do that, you need to believe that thought experiment that actually 90% of the population, or 95% of the population, or 100% of the population is capable of being an artist, a researcher, or an explorer. So, but in terms of the hard question of once you give the access, how do you get more people to participate? That's a programmatic thing that I think, we've tried some experiments. We're doing one in the Bay Area where we literally have 8% of students in the Bay Area participating. Half come from schools or 40% come from schools that are majority free and reduced lunch, and we are able to drive engagement at a reasonable scale. We're talking close to 100,000 students, and we might want to roll that out nationwide and eventually globally. There's a lot of great foundations in almost every region that care deeply about these issues, but it's not an easy problem, I guess is the simple answer. But I think there are ways over the next 10, 20 years that we'll tackle it.
Thank you so much for coming to speak with us tonight. My name is Ruhi, and my question is, what do you think the global future impact of free and accessible education will be, and how will this change the value of traditional institutionally valued education systems such as colleges?
Yes. So, there's some things that we know, like it's hard to predict the future, and people are going to be wrong and all of that, but I think there's a couple of truths that we already know, because to some degree they're already there, that information is, especially in 5 or 10 years, anything you want to know is going to be there. It's like you don't need to go anywhere to get it. You don't have to buy a textbook to get it. Even the textbook pub, they see the writing on the wall. That industry is, I know y'all love it, but it's going to go away. And so that is true. You don't need to go to a place for information. And so in that world, I think in a very healthy way, it's going to make universities and other institutions think very seriously about how to stay relevant. Now, I think universities have a great shot because of all the reasons. They have these incredible assets at their disposal. And they just have to, as long as they're capable of kind of reinventing themselves, and it's not a hard thing, there's just a lot of inertia and a lot of history that's backing them up. In terms of, I do think in 10 or 20, like today, society tells you if you want to be middle class or upper middle class, you must go to college. That you just have to do it. And to some degree, it might not even be true, and it actually gets a lot of very vulnerable people kind of going, being kind of, predatory types of institutions can take advantage of that, and then they're left where they were before, with debt and whatever else. But I think if you go 10 or 15 years in the future, there will be other narratives. And they aren't going to be, narratives if you didn't go to college. It could be narratives like you just chose not to go to college because you wanted to do this other thing. And I don't think people will look down on it. In fact, it might even be looked up to that thing. And these are just, and I think that's going to be very healthy because when you have multiple narratives, then it'll force them to kind of compete in a healthy way. So it's not going to go away. I think the cost pressure, there's no way that universities, their costs can continue to increase 5% faster than the rate of inflation. It doesn't take long exponential growth. You kind of fill the universe at some point. So that just can't happen. And I think once there's more kind of pathways, you're going to actually see a downward trend.
Hi, I'm Andre. I'm a third-year East major here. So basically, my question is that there's been a lot of talk about how MOOCs are homogenizing education. And I was wondering if you think that Khan Academy is doing that, basically, where everybody's kind of watching the same videos, learning the same things. So there's basically like no diversity in the education. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? And do you think Khan Academy is doing that?
Yeah, well, there's aspects to it. This isn't a new thing. Literally in the late 1800s when textbooks became kind of more commonplace, people said the same thing, like, hey, you're kind of standardizing the information in a certain way. Before, it was really every teacher kind of had their own kind of flavor, and some were great, very accurate, and some weren't, but like now you had a kind of a standard for whatever it was. For better or for worse, that was probably a good transition because it allowed the teacher to kind of, once again, the textbook took care of some things. It allowed the teacher to kind of customize and do other things up here. I think, Khan Academy or the MOOCs, I think our role is to be this next generation, hopefully much more than a textbook. It's, there's community there. There's textbooks, they couldn't have improved. They didn't know what's working, what's not. We know these things. But But I think we should be very thoughtful about how do we make sure that we don't definitely just have one narrative, that there's multiple voices. I mean, one thing Elizabeth and the team were always thinking about is how do we get more voices on Khan Academy? I mean, one thing that one of the reasons why I was so eager to come, we're actually going to start a kind of a search very shortly. We've been doing it very opportunistically. I'm not the only person who makes content. We already have a fairly large group. But we're going to look at places like Berkeley for people who could make great content. Actually, we brought a bucket, right? For if you have ideas of people, it could be yourself, it could be your roommate, it could be your TA, it could be just someone you saw on YouTube who you think could be great. We might be able to turn it into a career for them. So write their name down and put it in the bucket. So we want to do that. We want to create a place where we can put a light on kind of some of the best content out there. But at the same time, that shouldn't be a replacement for the physical classroom. The physical classroom should then be able to take that to one thing I don't want to talk too much about this lab, but if you visit the lab school, they're using Khan Academy, but there's far more variety in what goes on there, and the teachers are able to exercise far more creativity. And every day is far more different than in a traditional a classroom model. So not only is it the teachers, but also the students are getting a much more variety of experience. So it's something to be cognizant of, and we're thoughtful of it. But hopefully we'll be in a position to not, for it to be the good parts of it and not the bad.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Fernando. I'm a 28-year-old sophomore at a local community college called Untitled Chapter. And I found your career trajectory really interesting because it's something like similar towards what I want to do. You shift from a hedge fund to a tech startup. And I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what is your advice for someone that is hoping to do the same thing? Because someone like me, I don't have a lot of upward mobility as far as socioeconomic background, and that really ties into making that career choice. What really, besides the things that you've said earlier about your cousin and getting all the fan mail, really drove you towards making that jump?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And there's no right answer here. I mean, I was probably in the same position as a lot. You're in your early 20s and you're like, what do I do with my life? I kind of can imagine the realities that seem nice and other ones that don't seem nice. Like, how do you get there? And it still is a mystery. There are people who, they write business plans and they get the right funding, and there's a lot more of that happening in this area right now. For me, for my personality type, that would have been not the right thing. Actually, I did a little bit. I mean, my first career, my first job was at Oracle, and then I worked at another tech startup, and then a couple of folks started this other startup, and I was the third employee. So I was in that first .com bubble. I was kind of a full participant in that. And that was a great experience. And it's funny, I completely swore off entrepreneurship. I was like, I don't have it was too much of an emotional, and it is an emotional roller coaster. I mean, when you read the Forbes article or whatever, it seems like, oh, this is so easy. And I think anyone in this room is capable of it, but every one of these people go through dark moments that they don't write about in the Forbes article. And you just have to prepare yourself for that. But if you go through it, if you get through it on the other side, it does build your character in a good way. What I would say is, early in your career, optimize for experiences, optimize for people who are going to invest in you. Don't optimize for money, although money can be a signal of how much they value you. So you don't have to get that, you don't have to put yourself out to bid, but if someone is willing to pay you X, well, that might be a signal of how much they're, the responsibility that you might take. So take it into consideration, but really be thoughtful. I see a lot of people who care about the industry, but I say what matters much more is who's your first mentor, who's your first manager. Is that someone that you would, who inspires you? But the key is, and I think a lot of folks do that, but then don't forget your dreams. I mean, it's amazing how many of my friends, when we were college age, we would sit in the dorm room like, man, as soon as I can do this is what I'm going to do. And 10 years later, they become successful, they're partners at banks, and they're making a lot of money. And I sometimes I was like, you can, remember that thing we talked about back in 1996? You can do that now. How come you're not going to do that? And he's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Like, no, it'd be hard, and what I would say is just don't forget that. Like, write it down. Like remember it, because most people in this room, I think, if you kind of, their luck is involved and the economy and all of these things, but I would guess most of the people in this room are going to get to a place, when in their late 20s or mid 30s, where they're like, yeah, I knew I had some dreams when I was 22. I just wish they were work, because I'm in a better position now. And so just don't forget those, but don't but invest in yourself early on. So, and there's no right answer. I mean, I think there's probably someone in the room that probably next month is going to found $1 billion company. So, and you know, think of Khan Academy as it is high social return.
Cool. I want to thank all of the audience members who came up to ask their questions and partaking in this dialogue with Mr. Khan. Before we formally end the event, I want to pass it back to President Pierre Bourbonnais to make some closing remarks.
On behalf of the Berkeley Forum, I'd like to thank our moderator Carter Keeling as well as Mr. Khan once more. To express our gratitude to Mr. Khan for engaging in this informational discussion, I'd like to present him with a gift on behalf of the forum.
A laptop.